Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so we are now getting back into your first flip from after Easter break. Welcome back. Excited to see you in whatever sense that this is now, but it is good to see you guys. So giving you a heads up as well, your test grades, your first test grades are in there, okay? They're in RenWeb. They're loaded up. Some girls blew it out of the water. Did a phenomenal job. So a couple of them come to mind, like Jenna Chimino, Taylor Lafferty, Heather Goodwin, Isabella Jones, crushed it. Kaylee Roche, very, very, very impressed by a lot of y'all. Sky McCann, killed it, all right? So a lot of y'all did super, super well. Now, some of y'all, though, also struggled a little bit. And I just kind of wanted to take 2 seconds to kind of talk about that real fast. If you're looking at, like, this entire thing, and virtual schooling and all this other stuff and the craziness that is going on. Was I expecting this to be kind of tough for y'all? Of course, because you're now missing one big thing of my class that you're used to getting, which is that time in class where we review stuff with each other one-on-one and we do our warm-ups. We have that goofy little warm-up song and I throw the football to you and we do all that stuff. But look, you can still get that. You can still get a hold of that, like time with me. My office hours are available every day from 12:30 to 1:30. You're more than welcome to show up and come ask me some questions. You're more than welcome at any point to come show up and ask, hey, Mr. Terry, I think I really struggled on the short answer part because that's where most of y'all messed up. If you feel like you got a pretty rough grade and you want to know why that happened or you want to see your test, come to my office hours and we can set up a time to where I can kind of pull it up and show you where you went wrong and like some of the other stuff like that. And we can kind of just go over things if you want to. So please make sure you do that. Please trust this whole process and just keep staying after it, all right? If you work really hard for me, I'm going to make sure that your grades reflect that, okay? Because I will say a couple of those girls' names that I just shouted out, one in particular, Heather Goodwin, comes to office hours all the time, and she killed this test. Ended up with like a 93 or something ridiculous like that. So use all of your resources available to you, right? Come review with me, do what you got to do, and let's really keep crushing it. So we're now starting a brand new unit, and this unit is way, 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 way simpler and more direct than the last one. The last one is hands down the hardest unit of the year, okay? Just to give you a heads up. It is the toughest unit of the year. The last one has to do with like the fallout of the Napoleonic Empire, the rise of all these isms, new political thought and theory that may or may not agree with other types of political thought or theory, that may or may not like certain isms, blah, 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 blah. It's tough. It's a hard one, okay? The revolutions of 1848 is a pivotal moment in history, but I can understand it's a little confusing, okay? When you're talking about liberals and socialists united together to fight conservatives, but the conservatives eventually came back and stopped them. So, like, this is a hard concept that I wish that I would have been sitting in front of y'all with to discuss, but just remember, don't mute, do what you're supposed to, and let's stay after it, all right? But we're now moving into World War I. And going into the weekend, this is not going to be a very long flip. This is going to be one of our shorter virtual days, so we can kind of ease our way into all this stuff, okay? So we are moving now into the causes of World War I. Because we already did our little outline. We already did our outline. We know that World War I was from 1914 to 1918. We know that it was the Central Powers versus the Allies, that the Central Powers are also known as the Triple Alliance. Or no, we don't know that yet. We're getting into that today. That the Central Powers versus the Allies, the Central Powers being that of Austria, Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire, and then the Allies being United States late, right? Later on the United States, France, Great Britain, and Russia. We talked about how, like, 3 of these people are direct cousins, and, like, we got bloodlines crossing in Europe, and we got a very, very crazy bit of stuff going on. And we also talked about in the last flip as well, how, like, life going into World War I was getting a little intense, right? We were talking about how people were primed for war. They were afraid. They were fearful. Gender roles have changed. Science has broken all of these assumed theories of things. And, like, even art was reflecting the kind of tumultuous nature of Europe leading into World War I. It was not necessarily a peaceful place or a peaceful area during this time period, right? So when you're cooking this down for a survey course, okay? Now, if you were in my AP European class, I would talk to you for days about how these 4 causes of World War I are not limited to just these four things, blah, 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 which I gave you a slight taste of in the last flip when we talked about how this stuff, when we talked about how like strikes and protests for workers and feminism were at an all-time high. A lot of this were being suppressed with violence. Assassination of political figures was a major thing. Anti-Semitic activity. Imperialist Europe is going to... And like all this stuff is leading to World War I for the common person. Now, when you're talking about it politically, though, you can kind of cook down the understanding of why World War I happened into four main causes, okay? The main causes of World War I. These are umbrella terms. A lot of different things could fit underneath each of these things, these headings, and we're going to discuss two of them today. We're going to discuss alliances and militarism, and then we're going to do the other two later. But go ahead and take a chance to write all these down. These are the four big causes to World War I. The biggins, all right? The real big boys. Now, again, this is a survey of Western civilizations, an AKA 101 course that you will end up taking again in college. And I want you to remember, you're going to have some professor one day that's going to be like, your high school teacher probably said the main causes. Ha, 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 ha. It can't just be limited to those four things. I'm also saying that, all right? I'm also saying that saying militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism are the only thing, are the four things that led to World War I. It is true, but a lot of these things kind of interplay with one another. One of them in particular happens to be the biggest reason why everyone went to war. Another one in particular has another thing to do with them. And then a lot of people are going to be like, oh, assassination's the A because the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That wasn't even that important, all right? Like, it was kind of a tipping point, but it was like kind of just the last little like shove that Europe standing on the edge of the cliff needed to jump into war. It wasn't really necessarily a direct cause. Leaders of Europe actually went on vacation after that assassination was over. It's crazy. All right, so now getting into it, though, we're going to start off talking about the alliances that led to this crazy industrial war that was full of poisonous gas and barbed wire and fully automatic weapons and like all kinds of other crazy stuff, okay? So one of the biggest causes of World War I does happen to be the myriad of alliance systems that were being set up in Europe. Now, what an alliance is, just to give you a heads up, is an allegiance or agreement formed for mutual benefit. So let's just stick with the word agreement, okay? So an example of an alliance would be if we cooked down Europe and made it more like Chappelle, that I miss so much. I don't care what any of y'all say. I know for a fact some of y'all miss school because like some of you are missing your friends and stuff like that. And for those of you like, I don't like anybody at Chappelle, I'm going to tell you that we don't like you either. Now, so anyway, getting into it though, the causes of this alliance thing, if we were to say that Europe is Chappelle, okay, then we got to kind of assign some teachers to some countries, okay? So let's say, hypothetically speaking, you had an alliance system of me, myself, and Mr. Mathern, or me, myself, and myself, Mr. Wooderson, and Mr. Mathern were in alliance against Mr. Stein, Miss Jones, and Miss Kamatani. All right, so that was our like three alliance systems, right? And we all know that Mr. Terry doesn't like Mr. Stein, but Mr. Stein doesn't like Mr. Wooderson, and Mr. Wooderson doesn't like Mrs. Kamatani, blah, 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 blah. But basically this alliance system is saying that I'm not going to go directly attack them because I have people backing me up. It's more along the lines that if anything ever happens, that my alliance will back me up, right? So it's this agreement formed for mutual benefit. And it all actually didn't just kind of happen, okay? A lot of history classes will tell you, be like, oh, and then there was an alliance between Germany and Austria-Hungary and the Ottomans. All right, so, well, calm down. The original alliance, actually, the very first one that made its debut in Europe, all started with Bismarck, post-1871. In 1871, Germany became the German Empire. And by 1882, only 11 years later, which in the historic timeline is just a drop in the bucket of time, he created the first large-scale alliance to protect this new Germany. Because he thought about it in the back of his mind, no one will want to go to war with anyone if there are large alliance systems. So he was actually, a lot of historians believe, doing this to help prevent large-scale, all-out, full-out war that would have swept up all of Europe, which I like to think that's what he was doing. You never really necessarily know, but the original alliance that he made was actually called the League of Three Emperors, okay? Go ahead and highlight the League of Three Emperors alliance, okay? It was made through a series of different treaties, okay? Also, that's another thing you need to know. It's not like everybody got together one day and was like, we all become an alliance. Actually, a lot of these were like Germany allied with Austria, but then Austria allied with Russia, but then Russia eventually allied, which it's a very complicated thing. But what we're going to go ahead and start off with is this League of Three Emperors, okay? So Austria, Russia, and Germany formed an alliance in the or the late 1800s leading into the early 1900s, okay? Now, here's the problem, though. Two of the three of these people like each other a lot because they share a lot of heritage, they speak the same language, and they're very closely related to the other. And if you say Austria and Russia, I'm going to come over there, and I'm going to take your computer, and we'll break it in half, okay? Because Austrians don't speak Austrian, they speak German. So Germany and Austrians share certain cultural traits. They speak the same language. They have like an understanding of each other, if you will. So they linked up well together. Now, Russia and Germany, the only reason they linked up together so quickly is due to the fact that they are actually related. And we'll get to this, they're related. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, eventual leader of Russia, is cousins and related to the Kaisers of Germany and related to the Prussian crown, okay? So they were easy to link up. But here's the kicker. Russia and Austria, never really big fans of each other because it's going to fall apart, all right? Russia and Austria couldn't agree on how to rule the Balkan states. Now, the Balkans are very important, and they're going to come up a lot later in the next flip next week when we get into how these alliance systems are going to end up crumbling and how a lot of cultural boundaries are going to end up blowing up in everybody's face. But it's mainly because the bulk of the people that live in the Balkans are known as Slavic people. Slavic. S-L-A-V-I-C. Okay, I'm going to throw word up here really, really fast on the screen just so you can see it. Slavic is a very, very important word to understand in this entire history scape, okay? So Slavic people speak a different type of language. They're very different, okay? Let me explain it to you this way. Western Europeans include the French, the Italians, the Germans, the English, the Spanish. So if you looked at them as a cultural group, you've got two languages on the Western European side. You got the Germanic languages, and you have the Romance languages, extending mostly from Latin when they were conquered by the Romans, okay? So this is going all the way back, harkening all the way back to the very beginning of the year, okay? Slavic people, on the other hand, have an original cultural parentage group that's very different from everyone else, okay? And it's heavily debated on where they're all originally from, but Slavic people use a different alphabet. They use a Cyrillic alphabet. They don't even use the same alphabet that we use currently. They use the Cyrillic alphabet. Their language is highly, highly different from ours, and it's from English or Spanish or French, and they are a very specific cultural group. Now, some examples of Slavic countries include Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, Montenegro, Bulgaria. Those big ones are all in that Balkan region that we did our very first map quiz on back when y'all were this big. All right, so that whole region right near Greece, they're mostly Slavic people. Now, here's the kicker. Two empires controlled them for a long period of time, controlled all those different groups of people. That's the Austro-Hungarians and the Ottomans, okay? So, as you can see, the central powers are going to unite together so they can keep controlling those people later on, all right? So when the Ottomans include themselves in this thing. Now, there's one group of Slavic people I didn't mention yet that are very important, and that's the Russians, all right? Russians are also Slavic people, okay? Slavic, they have a very, 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 very specific style of language. For example, how you say grandma in Russian is babushka, all right? So, as you say, if I were to say God is good all the time in Russian, it's Bog Karoshi Sovrinya. All right, so as you can tell, it's a very, very intense, very different style language. So Russians are Slavic. So they believed all the Balkan people that were also Slavic deserved their own countries. They deserved to rule themselves. So they backed all those Slavic people. But the Austrians ruled a bunch of those Slavic people and did not want to let them go. That's why this original alliance fell apart, okay? Because Kaiser Wilhelm II, the tool that he is, fires Bismarck when he comes to power, and he pushes Russia out in favor of the Austrians instead. Because I guess he believed that he could easily manipulate the Austrians, or he possibly believed that there was going to be no way of ever losing these empires. So Kaiser Wilhelm II also represents the dying of conservatism in Europe, right? Conservatism is a dying thing. It's going out, right? It's phasing itself out. And classical liberals are the ones that are kind of rising up and taking over. So with him, he is like this last holdout of conservatives, and he believes that the Austrians and the Ottomans should be allowed to control all these other people if they want, whereas the Russians are like, you need to let them go. Those are Slavic people. They don't deserve to be ruled by you. So this whole thing falls apart. Kaiser Wilhelm II, though, takes over, fires Bismarck, pushes Russia out, which is really messed up because, like, that's your cousin over there, right, that you're, like, pushing out of this alliance. And then with Russia just kind of sitting there empty-handed, like, oh, well, who the heck are we going to be in an alliance with now? France then signs an alliance with them, which is very odd because the French and the Russians have not been friends since Napoleon tried to invade there in 1812, all right? But it's been 100 years, and the French look at the Russians as the enemy now of the Germans. And they're like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, due to the fact the French and the Germans have not got along very well ever since they lost a war called the Franco-Prussian War, which was also in the last unit, right? The Franco-Prussian War was an embarrassment for the French people. So they were looking for an alliance any way they could get it, just in case another war broke out with Germany. So when Russia got pushed out of that alliance with Germany, they went over there and signed a quick little agreement with them as fast as they could. There's a lot of other conflicting alliance systems. A lot of other historians talk about how Kaiser Wilhelm wanted to also be alliance systems with Great Britain to create this group of two Teutonic peoples. But we're not going to get into that right now. It's very confusing. It doesn't even pan out anyway. I'm not going to talk about hypotheticals with you. Now, the Triple Alliance, though, is going to be formed very swiftly, okay? The Triple Alliance is the formal name of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. I know for a fact one of y'all right now is like, wait a minute. Where are the Ottomans? You said the Ottomans. Look, you need to put a little star next to Italy real quick. You need to put them in parentheses. The original Triple Alliance included Italy because Italy was told that they would be able to have solidified borders and have their areas protected. They never anticipated going to war, though. So when World War I finally broke out, Italy switched sides, okay? So that is very important that you know that, okay? Very important that just because they're in the original Triple Alliance doesn't mean they were in the final one, okay? So Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, but what does Italy do when the war starts? Whoop, they switch sides. Keep that in mind, okay? So now, France and Germany are huge enemies ever since France lost the Franco-Prussian War because it was an embarrassment. The Germans blockaded the entirety of Paris, and then the Paris Commune starts, and they were like, Napoleon III, he's not our king anymore, he's not our emperor anymore, screw that guy, we don't even like him. And they oust him and force him out, in a sense, and they start another French Republic, and it was called the Paris Commune. And in this sense, the Germans then blockaded the entirety of Paris, and they were like, we'll just starve you out. And that's when they started eating zoo animals and stuff. Like I showed you all that menu when we were talking about nationalism in Germany. If you don't remember that even a little bit, then you need to pay attention to these flips a little bit better. But anyway, getting further into it. So the Prussians embarrassed the French in the Franco-Prussian War. So the French were always kind of like very, very, very big enemies with the Germans ever since. So to protect Germany, Wilhelm signs treaties with Austria and Italy, promising to protect each other if war ever broke out. Because you got to think about it this way. Germany and Italy now have equal access to northern France and southern France in a tactical sense, all right, in a strategic sense. That Italy could easily invade southern France, Germany could invade northern France, and they could easily knock them out if ever war came down to it. But what the Germans didn't expect is that Italy would switch sides later. So, pesky Italians. Now, anyway, ironically enough, they did it in both wars. In both wars, they flipped sides, which is absolutely wild. Now, in World War I and World War II. So, AKA, though, what they're also going to be known as is the Central Powers. But, as we know, the Ottomans are going to join up with this group when Italy leaves, okay? So remember that. When the Italians leave, the Ottomans join up in 1914, okay? So this original Triple Alliance, though, was set in 1882, okay? So this is like 20-something odd years, 30 years before the war ever even broke out. But they believed that this big alliance system would prevent them from ever having to go to large-scale war ever again. A lot of this is to protect economic interests as well. Wars cost a lot of money. If you lose, you end up in debt. If you win, it can pay out. But does Germany, a fledgling country that was just started in 1871, do they want to start a large international all-out war again? No. All right, so they don't want to do that at all. They want to keep war small and localized. That's why the Franco-Prussian War was fine, but when all these alliances start getting kicked up, it ain't going to be just a Franco-Prussian war anymore. It's going to be the Franco-Prussian, Austrian, Russian, and everybody else war. Hence why this becomes a all-out world war, right? So speaking of the other side, though, if you got a home team, you need a visiting team, right? You got to have two sides going against each other. So we just talked about the one side, which is the Central Powers, and now, let me make sure I'm recording still. Now we got to talk about the other side, the Triple Entente, all right? So the Triple Entente, also known as the Allies, all right? So just so you know what an Entente is, it's named after a very, 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 very specific treaty that was signed between France and England, which is very odd. Like, you see what I mean? Like, this is weird, because pretty much everybody hated France after Napoleon. You would think that they couldn't find an ally to save their life, but France is going to ally with Great Britain, even though, ironically enough, Great Britain and France hated each other when Napoleon was in power. So, and that was only about 100 years ago. Not even 100 years ago. Napoleon was ousted in 1815. This alliance was formed in 1904? Yeah, so anyway. Now, an informal agreement is what an entente is. An entente is like a handshake. It's kind of like, it's not a signed document, but it's an idea in a sense. It's like a handshake. It's like me going up to Mr. Mathern and being like, look, big guy, if Skylar Brulette ever tries to punch you in the face, I got your back. All right? So it's like an informal one. We didn't write it down. It's just kind of an understanding, right? So they were known as the Triple Entente because they were actually a series of different treaties. It was very weird because this is how it's kind of happened. The Triple Entente was France allied with Russia, and then Russia allied with Great Britain, and then Great Britain allied with France. So they were all kind of three bound together through separate treaties, okay? So they're also known as the Allies, all right? So now the Allies is going to include the United States later, all right, later, but it's important that you know that. And it also is important that you understand, looking ahead of World War I, World War II, the Allies are the same four countries, all right? So the Russians, the British, the French, and the Americans are the Allies in World War II. Also, if you're bored and you really love World War II stuff, highly recommend watching Band of Brothers. It's a HBO miniseries. It's on Prime. It's available. It's very, very good. It's extremely good, actually. All right, so anyway, now, this one is kind of odd. This alliance system was a little bit weird because France allied with Russia after the League of Three Emperors failed, right? So after the Russians and the Austrians couldn't agree on how to rule over what type of people? Good job, kids. Very, very impressed. Slavic people. We haven't had a Dora the Explorer moment in a long time.
We did it! We did it! We did it! We did it! Yay! Lo hicimos! We did it!
So anyway, the French are going to ally with Britain, okay? And they're going to have this entente cordiale, okay? So that is that informal agreement. And then the British are going to end up allying with the Russians, okay? So this is called the Triple Entente because it was never an official agreement that all three of them came together and they were like, I got your back. It was more like one had this one's back, and then this one had the other one's back, and then the other one had the other one's back, so now all three of these are bound together. So as you can see, the Americans weren't even officially in this for quite some time. It was the Russians, the British, and the French. And for some of y'all are being like, that's not the Russian flag. That's the old Russian flag. It's the Tsarist Russian flag from before the revolution, which is another major theme in this unit. We'll talk about the Russian Revolution. I'll tell you the Rasputin story. It's one of my favorites. Now, if you want a graphic organizer to understand how this whole thing works, here it is, okay? So look at this bad boy. This is a picture of the alliances. Right now, might be a good time to screenshot this. Wait a minute, I'll give you a second. There you go. So that right there is a graphic organizer of the alliance systems, okay? So this shows you how all of them were kind of bound and wound together. Now, as you can see, the Balkans, right, these Slavic people are everywhere, are coming into major play. Because in the Balkans, no one could agree on if these Slavic people should be independent countries or if they should be gobbled up by these empires, right? So Bulgaria ends up joining the Central Powers, and the Serbians, they're super important. Serbia. Just really quick, in a nutshell, just write Serbia down next to the Allies, right? Just put Serbia and underline them because they're going to come in hugely important later. Super important. Write Serbia and then circle it. A lot of historians believe that the whole war was Serbia's fault. And other ones believe it's Austria's fault. Actually, the whole historical community can't agree on whose fault it was. If you had to ask me, I'd say it's all of them's fault. All right. So anyway, now, which is another historian, I can't remember what his name is, but he actually says the same thing. Now, here's another really, really, really solid graphic organizer. Because what is it, kids?
If there's a place you gotta go, I'm the one you need to know. I'm the map. I'm the map. I'm the map. If there's a place you gotta get, I can get you there, I bet. I'm the map. 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 I'm the map.
There you go, right? So if you want to go ahead and take a screenshot of this as well, just so you can have a map representation of the Allies and the Central Powers going into World War I, this could dramatically help you. Because we're going to get into it later about how Germany, Austria, and the Turks were at a massive disadvantage, geographically speaking, because they're going to end up having to fight a two-front war. As in, they're going to have a front here and a front here, so they're at a huge disadvantage by comparison to all the other countries, all right, because of where they were located. And why are they called the Central Powers? Because they're in the center area of Europe, and the Allies are on either sides of them, okay? Here's another good representation if you want to take a screenshot of that. All right, so now we're going to talk about the other big cause of World War I going into it. It's known as militarism. Now, this is a hard one to explain, all right? Militarism's tough because it's kind of an abstract concept. And if I had to put my finger on the least impactful the cause of World War I, I'd probably put it on this one in a sense, all right? Because I think militarism is simply an extension of nationalism and the alliances, right? I think it's kind of like, yes, it is a main cause because a lot of these countries are economically competing with each other now, right? And what is one of the ways you show your economic dominance? Through your military. So something you need to understand about Europe during this time period, Europe's changing a lot. It's now directly related back to the Industrial Revolution. So in the last unit, we talked about the Industrial Revolution, right? Occurring usually, a lot of historians don't agree on when or where, but I like to think it's, give or take, 1780 to like 1850, or 1750 to 1850, maybe that 100-year span right there. This Industrial Revolution is going to change everything dramatically. Because now countries are competing with each other for more money and more colonies. And also, where do you show your wealth? In your military, right? So a lot of post-industrial revolution, there was this guy named Baron de Haussmann, all right? Napoleon III, the first president of the French, is going to hire him, the same guy that lost the Franco-Prussian War to Otto von Bismarck, right? Throwing it all the way back to the last unit. He was important, though, because he hired this guy, Baron de Haussmann, to renovate France, right? And he changed it dramatically. I'm going to throw a picture up here of what France looked like before Haussmann and then what it looked like after Haussmann, right? So as you can see, France went through a transition, right? The face of these cities are changing. They have these giant boulevards now, these big wide streets. A big reason for that was to have humongous military parades. In the late 1800s, this concept of militarism started to pop up, that countries want to glorify their military, right? How do you glorify it? You build it up, you make it bigger, stronger, and you make it better equipped than the next door neighbor. Militarism is also taking on a new face as well because this is now an industrial military, right? It's no longer this ragtag group of people that may or may not be a militia or may not be in this professional army. This is now an industrial military. Everything has changed, right? You have your formal uniform now, but now you also have your mass-produced uniform that has come out of a factory, and it's just a very basic color, and it's made to get out there quick, right? We got new weaponry coming out. We got breech-loading rifles now. Breech-loading means it's instead of a musket, putting it into the barrel and shoving it all the way down with a ramrod, we now have breech-loading rifles where you pull a bolt back and push that bullet in and go, and you can actually take multiple shots now. But the best example of the new industrial military is, of course, the Maxim gun that was going to be invented in 1884, right? In 1884, Hiram Maxim is going to invent the first fully automatic machine gun that could fire 600 rounds per minute. It looked like this, all right? And that's him actually sitting with one of his earliest designs. So, fires 600 rounds per minute. Now, that right there, that's the industrial military coming into play in the late 1800s, going into World War I. This whole thing is going to dramatically change because now you've got factories that can make thousands of these for a military. Thousands of rounds. You can make everything faster, more efficiently. And this means that you can put more guns in more soldiers' hands and make bigger military so you can fight a bigger war. So you have to understand, this war is going to terrorize Europe. It's going to lead to a possible 40 million deaths. That's being conservative because we don't know all the numbers for sure because they didn't have an accurate system of keeping track of how many people died in this war, all right? But a lot of it has to do with this new technology and this industrial military that's shown up, right? And this is them actually using the Maxim gun in World War I. As you can see there, their gas masks on. We'll talk about poisonous gas later on. But it's very, very big. It's heavy. It's clunky. It jams a lot, but it's still very efficient at killing large groups of people, all right? Because a lot of these generals in World War I were not ready for fighting an industrial war. They weren't prepared to fight a war on a grand industrial scale where stuff's now coming out of factories and being produced en masse, right? Look at this, like, for example, look at this thing. This is, like, goofy looking, yeah, but you know what generals' ideas for stopping these things were? Oh, let's just charge at it. We'll be able to stop them, or we'll get there. It's fine. It's a terrible idea, all right? These things would mow people down. And also, some of you are probably looking at it right now, and you're like, I've seen guns before in movies and stuff, and I've never seen one with a barrel this big on it. That's actually a water jacket. It's a big sleeve of water that was put on the end of a Maxim gun to keep the barrel from overheating and warping, because they figured I'll insulate it with a water jacket. And sometimes all the water would evaporate out of it, and the soldiers had to, like, pee in it to keep the gun from breaking. There's a lot of random pee in World War I, just to give you a heads up. And French people would pee on the gas mask. I'm not going to get into it right now. But the Industrial Revolution is going to change everything. And so the militarist side of it is going to now be an industrial military that is being glorified, right? The industrial military is going to change because you've now got locomotives, steam-powered locomotives that can bring supplies to the front lines faster and more efficiently, right? You now have telegraph lines that can communicate faster and more efficiently. That's a telegraph right there. And Samuel Morse is going to invent the code for David Atler's telegraph machine. Those are dee, 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 and they could send messages in an instant now instead of sending them after days on horseback. And then a big one are these guys, steam-powered ships that can now sail further, longer, faster. So it's not just the ground military that's going to change. The naval military changed as well. And this is the last slide for today, all right? But this is another component of that militarism aspect. A huge naval arms race broke out in the 1900s, all started by one boat, okay? One boat. This huge naval arms race that came out of the Industrial Revolution and as a component of this militarist aspect was started because of this class of ship. That right there is a depiction of the HMS Dreadnought. Dread as in fear, not as in nautical miles per hour, as in the speed at which it moves, all right? So that dreadnought right there, as you can tell, is completely iron constructed, is powered by steam engines, and has over 7, I don't even know, like so many 12-inch guns on them. 12 inches being the diameter of the barrel, all right? So, like, that means that that thing fires bullets bigger than this football, and it could fire them for over a mile, all right? Common one, like a lot of the battleships now also have those equipped on them as well. You can actually see them docked in on the Mississippi in New Orleans if you're actually down on the, like, standing in Jackson Square, all right? So, but a dreadnought is the very first fully iron warship ever built. And then the English are going to start trying to make as many of them as they can. The Germans are going to catch wind of this, and they're going to be like, oh, no, we got to make as many of those dreadnoughts as we can. So that led to a naval arms race, right, where England just kept building them up and building them up. And then Germany started building theirs up, trying to catch them and trying to pass them as fast as they could. But the British were able to stay ahead because, remember, the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain. So they were fully prepared to make more of them. So then all of a sudden, the Germans decided, you know what? We're done building dreadnoughts. We're going to build the dreadnought killer. And you know what kind of boat is a dreadnought killer? It's this guy right here. I'm going to say it with you now. Okay, let's say it together. Unter sie Boot. All right, say unter sie Boot. Say unter sie Boot. All right, unter sie Boot, an unter sie Boot is one of these guys. It's a U-boat. All right, an undersea boat, an underwater boat, a U-boat, a submarine. All right, so like that's what that thing is. These could dive under the water and sink the dreadnoughts from below. All right, so they started building these instead. And Germany, by the end of the naval arms race, is going to have more submarines than any other country in the entire world. And they're going to try and use them to destroy any boat that they can find. Remember that. This is a very important slide, all right? The naval arms race, okay? The dreadnought versus the Unterseeboots. All right, so that's it. We're going to stop there. It's been about 35 minutes. I know it was a little bit longer than I expected, but you know what? I hope you all enjoy your weekend. Get into it. Enjoy it. Y'all are going to kill this unit. It's one of my favorites. It's one of the ones I know the most about. I'll talk to you guys soon. Y'all have a good one.